Hi everybody, this is Pastor Dave for the Daily Word. I'm back in my cone of silence. This cone of silence and the camera I'm using on my iPhone is kind of like a Batman movie where the camera angle is weird and all sorts of stuff. So that's because the person I'm using to run the camera is an idiot and I'm the one that's running the camera. So anyway, for the Daily Word this time, I have been given 2 Corinthians chapter 8 through to chapter 12 and 13. So let me give you a little background. I don't know what the other guys have done, but let me give you a little background to 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Paul had visited Corinth for the first time in Acts 18. And we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that when Paul got there, he was in weakness, fear, and trembling because it was difficult delivering the gospel throughout this region due to the hostility of the synagogue against Paul and various other factors. They had him beat up in the first missionary journey. He's on the second missionary journey, and it says in 1 Corinthians 2, 1 through 5, I was with you in weakness and fear and trembling. And that really gives us the central idea of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And if you want to know the central idea, it essentially is this: that we are placed here in a school of lifelong learning to learn spiritual lessons. And in delivering the gospel, Paul was being taught spiritual lessons that he was to learn. And that's the heart of the gospel, the spiritual lessons. And there's one lesson in particular that Paul learned that we're going to bring up. But let me give you a little background. When he got to Corinth on the first missionary journey, it was the capital city of Achaia. It was prosperous. It was a harbor town, all sorts of trade and commerce, and it was notorious for vice. So Paul will be struggling with the Corinthian church for their sanctification, or their being more like Christ in the midst of a culture and society that was quite decadent. Centering in Corinth was a temple where it was dedicated to Aphrodite, and there was temple prostitution, mostly women, but there could have been also men there. And the culture of Corinth was constantly bearing on the actions of the Corinthian church. When Paul gets there, he gets to the synagogue. He always started with the synagogue, but he caused a synagogue split. Paul split synagogues everywhere, and that caused him trouble with enemies that were Jewish. And then he also had enemies that were false teachers. So everywhere he went, he had problems within with carnal churches, enemies who would come in and try to pervert the gospel, and they would beat him up. And yet, remember, we said that the key to these two books are the spiritual lessons that God wants us to learn. And Paul, what is very interesting is God put Paul in those circumstances so that he would learn those spiritual lessons. So what is the key verse of both of these books together? Because they're bookends. And really the key verse, and I'm going to go not in the order of chronological order of chapters, but I'm going to go in the key order of what Paul learns spiritually through this circumstance of 1 Corinthians, the book 1, and then book 2, and it centers in this. 2 Corinthians 4:7, Paul will say, "We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves." All of these situations that Paul faced at Corinth were a school of learning for Paul. And we're going to find out in the next video that that lesson was, and it's a hard lesson, when we are at our weakest, God is at his greatest power for the believer.